Namaskar. The first three episodes of the Gita podcast with Jaya Rao are out, and they have struck a chord with young listeners. Real questions, honest conversations, timeless wisdom made relevant. Do share the podcast with the youth of our society. The link of the podcast is in the description box. Now, for some exciting news. Jayaji will be in Kolkata for three transformative evenings from Friday 6th to Sunday 8th February, 3 days at the Kala Mandir. Save the dates and join us to cultivate the miracle mindset, a shift that can profoundly change how you think, act, and live. We are sure you have family and friends in Kolkata. Share the invite with them so they can experience this transformation firsthand. The link to register for these free lectures is in the description box. Now, let us conclude chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita.
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Any questions?
Are thoughts created or do they come to us?
I don't know what you mean by created. See, we are born with vasanas, right? So you may have a vasana for music, for plays, for a sport, for anything. Now that vasana remains dormant until the environment is conducive for it. So till the age of 50 also, if the environment is not conducive, the vasana will not come up. The moment you get a conducive environment, the vasana starts manifesting. Now you think you've created it. It's not creation. Yes, you can, but we're coming to it. So one is you're born with vasanas and they manifest when the environment is conducive. You don't know it. You don't know you have a vasana. So it comes up. The second way of creating a thought is from the environment. You are exposed to certain things and it appeals to you, you pick it up. You embrace it. So it becomes yours. The third way is where you consciously make an effort to cultivate certain thoughts. That is what we are trying to do. Our spiritual urge may be very weak, but when you give it the right environment, you give it the right satsang, they call it, then it gathers momentum. So there are these three ways. You can call it create. What was your question? Do we create or do we receive it from outside? Both. You get these thoughts from inside because you have a vasana for it. You may not have a vasana, but you are exposed to a certain thing. You like it, you pick it up. But what is important is, whichever way it starts, if you don't supervise it, if you're not aware of the thoughts that you are picking up or creating or whatever it is, then you go in a direction that you may not want to. Like you meet a person, you say nice person, huh? And that you reinforce that thought, nice person, nice person, nice person. Before you know it, you're attached to the person. Now, once you're attached, it's difficult to break free. But the process of attachment you can supervise and pull back, where either it is not in your interest or it is not necessary to get attached to random people. So that is important. What kind of thoughts you're allowing into your system from the outside, and what kind of thoughts you are allowing to manifest from your vasana level. So what happens is that if you, for instance, make a concerted effort to cultivate only positive thoughts, then you're creating an environment which is not conducive for negative vasanas to flourish. So they remain underground, as it were. They remain dormant and then they get thrown out. So that is what we need to do. But we don't do it. So you end up with so many thoughts that you have not asked for, that you perhaps did not even want. But then you say they've just come. They don't just come. When you're not aware of the thoughts and you don't make an effort to control these thoughts, then it seems as if you are a helpless victim of your own thoughts. That is not true. If you're aware, you can direct those thoughts properly. And that makes a world of difference. You start, let's say, from now onwards, from the time we stop the class, you say, I must entertain positive thoughts. So, when you make up your mind and you're aware and your intellect is kind of available, then negative thoughts that come, you just throw them away. And if they come from within you, you ignore them. Or you don't give them an environment in which to flourish. So they go. But what we are doing is very, very wrong. It's like weeds in a garden. You are giving it fertilizer, you are giving it manure, you are watering it, you are tending to it, you are spending money on it. And what does it give you? Weeds. You know how weeds function? They go and finish off the positive plants also. And they spread like wildfire. So negative thoughts are like that, which they have noticed Meta has noticed, that let's say you post something negative, it automatically attracts attention. So it will get more views, more shares, more likes, more everything, which suits Meta. But they didn't know that in the beginning. They just observed. And as it happens, there are more negative posts than positive. So you pick it up, You see what you pick up on social media. Anything anti somebody, you pick it up, you want to know what there is. Anything positive, boring. Right? So this thought creation, whichever way it goes, is well under your control. And you have to use it. Make the right choice from there onwards, thought level onwards. Which we don't do and then get into trouble.
So the dormant vasanas compulsorily we have to go through it when the environment comes up. So we have to go through it and then eliminate it. Then only we will. But the one which are dormant you are already existing.
No, it's not like that. All vasanas don't need to come to the surface and you have to deal with it. It's not like that. Thank God for that. What happens is, see, you are at different levels. Let's take an example from our own lives. As a child, you had thousands of desires for toys. Were they all fulfilled? No. Do you still have them now? No. Did you pick them up one by one and deal with them? No. How did they go then? How did they go?
You grown up to higher.
You grew. You grew up to higher fascinations, to subtler enjoyments. And as a result of that, these lower ones vanished. So this is called sublimation. Sublimation is the best way of getting over vasanas, which is through knowledge. You understand sublimation in chemistry? No? Okay. You would know the word sublimation, right?
Yes.
So, when a substance goes from solid state to gas without passing through liquid, it is called sublimation. An example of that is what we use in puja all the time, arti, camphor. We light camphor precisely for that. Campher's fragrance. Fragrance solidified is camphor. Similarly, vasanas are just fragrance. Even the word vasana means fragrance. So that vasana can be sublimated. It does not have to go through manifestation. It doesn't have to go through the chronology, normal chronology of vasana, thought, desire, action. Unless you want to. See, the problem is we don't want, we are not aware. So we don't know what's happening. And we unnecessarily give negative vasanas a conducive environment. That's why we took the example of a weed. What would you say to a person who is fertilizing, giving manure, watering, tending to weeds? You'd call the person a fool, right? But that's what we are doing. And the system is doing it. So news, breaking news. Why is it called breaking news? It's negative. Always, 100% of the time, breaking news is negative. Why? It's not their fault. They are only catering to what we want. So you pick up breaking news. And it's a very apt term that they're using for it because it breaks us. You're exposed to negativity. First thing in the morning, you read the newspaper, it's all negative. And then throughout the day, it settles into you, this negativity. And then you're providing it a ripe environment for negative vasanas to flourish. That is why we say, start the day with the study of the Bhagavad Gita. You have no idea how powerful it is. And one idea, if it appeals to you, just one, you have to start with one idea from the so many ideas you're exposed to. Let's say you study or you watch the Bhagavad Gita for 1 hour. In that 1 hour, you're exposed to many ideas. But you pick up one. One appeals to you. And then you ruminate over it, you think over it. It makes an impact. There is an impact. Like that, every day, every morning, you expose yourself to something positive, then it protects you from negativity. It's like your immune system. If your immune system is strong, you're exposed to bacteria and viruses that pathogenic, which cause disease. But you don't fall ill because you have an active immune system. So your psychological immune system is this spiritual content which you must imbibe. And you, I don't know what you people think. When I say study the Bhagavad Gita, you probably think, Arey, she has nothing better to do except talk about Gita. It's not that. Or you say, Arey, I have urgent thing, matters to attend to. Why do you have urgent matters to attend to? Why? Why have you got into tricky problems? Because your intellect was not alert earlier. Now, what are you doing now? Still you are not going back to fundamentals. Because you say, I am caught up, entangled, stressed out, busy. Busy with what is the question? Ask yourself that. What are you busy with? Worldly things. Which will go. Right? So that, our fundamentals are all messed up. We give too much importance to passing phenomena. Things that are there today that will be gone tomorrow. And you scramble to reach that. Scramble to get there. All of us are like that.
This is to personal experience. I have been one of our mentors to someone who is very religious. They do want to puja. So the rituals they perform. But after 6 months, I asked them, did you study? They said, so why are people, because they don't want to change their thinking. They don't mind doing all the religious activity, but they don't want to use the intellect or whatever you say, implement what is taught.
You see, the question you're asking is, why are people, even when you give them the Bhagavad Gita, why do they not study it? They may put it in the puja room. They have respect for it. They will do puja to that pen drive also. But they will not study it. You know why? Because doing the puja is much easier than thinking. Thinking is such a strain.
Not that time is not there. People do have time for that, but nobody wants to change that.
That's the problem. Yeah?
Staying with her line of thought. You've got a certain level of vasana. You're aware of the vasana. You have to deal with that vasana. You go ahead with the thought process to the action level.
What do you mean by spiritual growth? That is the question. What do you think is spiritual growth?
For me, the first thing is just calm mind first.
Sorry?
Calm mind. I'm on the right path. I'm just explaining that. That's not what I want.
No, see, a lot of people think they're doing the right thing. Not a lot. Majority of people think they're doing the right thing when they're actually doing completely wrong things. Wrong in the sense, you are involved in it, you're attached to it, and you think you're doing it for the other person. But if you really analyze, you're doing it because you have a fascination for it. You have a desire to do it. For the other person maybe. But your desire is yours, right? Now once you get involved in it and you give it more importance, see, because your life covers a wide spectrum. This happens to be, let's say, 2% of your total life. And you are giving it 40% importance. That's a clear sign that you are attached, you're involved, you're entangled, and you can't get out. Because your mind is functioning and not intellect. So, spiritual development means the use of the intellect to remain objective through all your activities. Because the moment you take the stand that, oh, I am helping you, who are you to help anybody? Number one. Number two, what makes you think you are actually helping? You may be of nuisance value to the person. I'm not talking about you, generally. And often it happens. Even with close relations, the moment you are attached, like a mother is attached to the child, right? And then she thinks she is doing everything for the child. Ask the child. Child wants the mother to get off his back. Attachment. So, if you are truly spiritual, you would revisit your convictions and say, am I really helping? You know, there's a person I know who's a very passionate environmentalist, working for the environment. And so part of what he's doing is veganism, and all that is very good. But one day, it just occurred to me, I didn't say that to him. What makes you think that what you are doing is going to save the environment? Huh? You go back into the past, his history. Ice Age came. How did it come? Just now you read about Antarctica. Suddenly tons and tons of ice has formed. How did it form? Are you trying to say that you worked for it? You understand what I'm saying? So you must always carry the conviction that I am doing something that I think is right. God knows whether it's right or wrong. At this moment, it seems to me to be the right thing to do, and I'm doing it. And leave it. Like Mark Antony. You know, you must put yourself in Mark Antony's position. In Julius Caesar, he was his dear friend. He loved Caesar dearly. He also knew that Caesar loved Brutus dearly and had immense confidence in Brutus. And it is that Brutus who turned Turk and assassinated him. And then he tells the crowd that I murdered him because he was ambitious. So Mark Antony is boiling with rage because he knows that's not true. Then he gains his balance. He says, Caesar is dead, I can't bring him back. But at least I can clear his name. So he sets aside his grief, he sets aside his broken heart, he sets aside everything. Meaning, he sets aside his personal beliefs, feelings, emotions, hurt, whatever it is, and decides to just play his part. So he goes there. Caesar's body is lying there. And he asks Brutus for permission to speak at Caesar's funeral. Permission granted. Brutus is flying high. Because he's given a lecture to the crowd and all of them are saying, Hail Brutus, Hail Brutus. First mistake. Second mistake, which was fatal, Brutus left the scene, so there's no way of recovering. You're all familiar with at least the story of Julius Caesar? He starts very innocuously, very innocently. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. And one by one, he takes every statement that Brutus has said about Caesar, demolishes it, and asks them, does this in Caesar seem ambitious? The crowd roars, no. And then he says, yet Brutus said Caesar was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. He doesn't say one word against Brutus. And in the end, when he's done, the crowd now is gunning for Brutus. This shows that people are undependable, you know. One moment they'll say, Arey, Piyush is a great man. Your own friends. Next moment they'll say, rascal. So don't go by what they say. Caesar himself, Shakespeare himself has said, reputation is an idle and most false imposition. Often got without merit. You don't deserve it, you get it. And lost without deserving it. You lose a reputation without deserving the loss. Anyway, coming back. So, he knows he's done his job. He has no hatred for Brutus. What was his mission? To clear Caesar's name. He's achieved it. Mission accomplished. So he stands aside and says, now let it work. Mischief thou art afoot. Take thou what course thou wilt. What an objective view of it. He knew all he did was he played mischief with the people. But his mission was accomplished. Now take whatever course you want. That is 100% objectivity. And it's very difficult to be objective in a situation where you have a stake in it. You're a stakeholder in that situation. I don't mean money-wise, emotionally or whatever. Very difficult to be objective. But that is spirituality. You get it? Now you'll understand we are very far from it. You can't say, I've achieved it, I'm spiritual. Because when you're put to the test, you fail. I hope you're never put to the test, but when you're put to the test, which means, really bad things happen, your life is at stake. How do you react? Yeah? So, even the wisest of people have always carried this humble feeling that there's miles to go. And for me, I think I mentioned it last time, Shabana Azmi, I saw a video of hers, fantastic. She was talking about life itself, how much you need exposure to various things. And she was talking about acting because she's an actor. She says, I'm amazed that people go to acting school for 3 months, come out and say, I'm an actor. What do you know of acting? So, in life, whatever profession you're in, to gain that maturity, you must have that experience, exposure at least. So she said, you must have exposure of theatre. You may not understand. You must have exposure to classical music. How many people listen to classical music? At least on YouTube? No, there is zero exposure. You take kids growing up, zero exposure. You must have exposure to art, various things of life, to have a complete life. You may not, or spiritual lectures even. You don't. With great difficulty you come. You don't even bother to tell your family members, Arey, come, children particularly. Oh, they're not interested. Would you say that to going to college? Oh, my son is not interested in college, so I've left him. Let him be uneducated. Who says that? Which parent says that? Or school. My daughter doesn't want to go to school, so I've left her at home. Will you say that? No. You will force that child to go to school. The child goes crying in the initial stages. But you force the child. You don't do any such thing when it comes to spiritual exposure. I would say, tell your kids, gain at least one exposure, come once. Just as we say, when a child says, I don't like vegetables, do you say it's okay, don't eat vegetables? What do you say? Taste it, try it. So at least that first exposure must be there. And I don't mean just one exposure. Like things like literature, poetry, classical music, there has to be repeated exposure for you to even appreciate it. Because initially, that is the quality of anything classical. You don't like it. Junk you like. And therefore, everything has become junk. You know, when there were 2 generations back, when there was a wedding in the family, there would be some exposure to classical music or something. Today, what is it? Correct. Start to finish is Bollywood. So the bride wants to dress like a star. And everything is centered around Bollywood. I have nothing against Bollywood, but all I'm saying is then you bring down the standard. And there is no finesse in life. There's no subtlety in life. Because of that, every guy thinks I'm an ustad. I'm a master at spirituality. It's like going to acting school for 3 months and saying I'm an actor. Right? So you must always carry that. Because you don't know how you will react when things go wrong in your life. So what is spirituality? Humility. What is spirituality? Objectivity. What is spirituality? The ability to understand that I am a damn fool. Mudha. No, I don't mean you, I mean myself. All of us. Because we have fat egos. And that has to be punctured. By whom? Who can do it? Only you can do it. Because you're so cocooned in this ego that even if others puncture it, you only lash out at them. It never occurs to you that something may be wrong with me. And that is the starting point of spirituality, where you look within and begin to see. That's why continuously he says, Yaha pashyati saha pashyati. Means one who sees. Sees what? The reality, the truth. And the truth is that I am a stupid person. No jokes, I mean it. Because if you look in your past and see all the foolish things you've done, why have you done those foolish things? Intellect not available. Why are you continuing to do those foolish things? Ego keeps you from self-correction. So the first sign of spirituality is to understand, I don't know. And I must know, I must learn. You know, we are talking about getting to the state of realization. That is not even anywhere near our vision. But even a spiritual person who is like a sage, he goes through several janmas to get over those little obstacles. What do you think our state is? You're sitting on a mountain of obstacles. And your ego tells you, no, I am very spiritual. So what does a wise person say? Very good. You're great. He's not being hypocritical. Because he can't do anything. He sees. Yaha pashyati saha pashyati. He sees, but we don't see. So what does he do? He leaves us alone. Because there is no chance. In 100 janmas we will not understand. Understand what? That I am a damn fool. And if you walk out of here with the recognition that yes, I have made mistakes. Yes, I have shortcomings within me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because I believe last time somebody could not hear. And I try to keep the volume up and somehow I go down. So if you can't hear, please stop me. And the test is that you meet with problems. Right? You have issues with one person, you have something with another person, you get irritated with the third person. These things happen. Why? Where does the friction begin? In my mind. Because I have this sense of separateness with people. Where you feel one, you don't have a problem. I've met with a mother who has an alcoholic son. And that son has a vile temper. And many problems associated with the son. The wife complains about him. The brothers complain about him. Siblings complain about him. Everybody complains about him. They ask the mother. What will she say? No, my son, he's a wonderful person. Wonderful? He's an alcoholic woman. She cannot accommodate the thought. It's not that she doesn't know. Of course she knows she's suffering. But in her mind, when she thinks of her son, she thinks love. So, the message to us is, if you're getting irritated with people, if you're whatever it is, then it means you are not spiritual. Because the test of perfection is what? To see yourself in everyone and everyone in you. We are a far cry from there. So at least you must be honest with yourself. To others you can go around behaving like a Muni, sage. But within yourself you must understand, this is my level. And I must struggle to raise myself to that level. Unfortunately in life, nothing comes without effort. You want to lose 5 kilos. What do you think will happen to you? How long do you think it will take?
Few days.
Few days?
Because weight reducing tablets.
At least 2 months.
You want to overcome your anger. How long do you think? I am not waiting for you to answer. 5 janmas. It's like that. It's tough. It's difficult. And you have to put in that effort. Okay? You asked a simple question. What is spirituality? You got a nice long answer. So coming back here, we are towards the end of chapter 5, where he's, in the Bhagavad Gita, one chapter kind of telescopes into the other. So the 6th chapter is called Dhyana Yoga, the yoga of meditation. You can't meditate unless you have gone through the initial stages of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga. Then you reach the state of withdrawal from the world. Withdrawal is not indifference. Withdrawal means you have higher interests. And therefore, you're not interested in gossiping and doing other things. Uparati, it's called, withdrawal from the world. Then, dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, samadhi, realization. So, chapter 5 talks about renunciation, that withdrawal from the world. And it leads to dhyana, meditation. So, these verses are leading up to that. So, we had finished verse 25, and we'll move on to 26.
कामक्रोधवियुक्तानां यतीनां यतचेतसाम् अभितो ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं वर्तते विदितात्मनाम्.
There is total liberation in Brahman for those who are free from desire and anger, self-controlled, with mind restrained, who have realized the self. So, if you look at the trend of thought, verse 22 begins by saying, sense contact are wombs of sorrow, the wise do not revel in them. 23 says, if you withstand this vega, the force of desire and anger, then you will be a happy person. What are we doing? Just the opposite. We're encouraging desire. Verse 24 spoke of internal sadhana. Internal sadhana means you follow the path of contemplation, reflection, thinking, trying to figure things out in your mind. If you're not up to this, then you go down to verse 25, which speaks of external sadhana. External sadhana is control of the senses, karma yoga, which simply means acting, working, living with the attitude of giving and not taking. Bhakti yoga, where you x-ray through a person's faults and externals and identify what is good in that person. What is good? See, ultimately what is good is Atman. So as you go deeper, you see good things in the person because it is Atman that is functioning there. So you can't see anything negative. It's only on the surface that the negativities are there. And then you gain knowledge by the study of the scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, so on and so forth. And your doubts get dispelled. You gain clarity of thought. And the quality control is you revel in the well-being of all people. And the end is you become free from desire and anger. So the prerequisites for meditation are two things. Yatinam, yatachetasam. Yatinam, body control, means externals. Yatachetasam, mind control, internals. See, which is why in the Ramayana, Rama collected monkey forces to overcome Ravana. Now, you might wonder, Ram was the son of Dashratha. Dashratha was a mighty king of Ayodhya, right? Why does he have to go collecting monkeys and squirrels? All he had to do is go to other kings and happily they would have joined him. It's like the President of the United States. Will he look for, I don't know, small countries, Fiji, Mauritius, for help? Who will he go to? All of Europe, Australia, Japan, maybe. These are the people who will happily help him. Why does he do that? Because monkeys and squirrels represent thoughts. In your mind, if you want to gain victory over the Ravana within you, you want to control your senses, you have to gather the thought forces within you and get all your thoughts directed towards the higher. Higher is, Rama represents Atman. So that is the thing. Other people who don't understand say, hey, what kind of a god is he? He has to run after monkeys and squirrels. It's not that. So when the mind is not steady, there are disturbances. You get disturbed very easily. So you have to remove these disturbances. External world, you knock. How do you keep the external world out? You stay in seclusion. You cannot meditate in the middle of Flora Fountain Place. The people are honking. You can't meditate when you have 25 people around you. It has to be in seclusion, alone. Then, physical body also disturbs you. And in those days, they meditated for a long period of time. So there is a posture. You have to sit in a posture that it will not disturb you even when you sit in like that for a long time. Then the breath. If your breathing is not regular and short, then it disturbs your mind. If you're panting for whatever reason, your mind is not steady. So you do pranayam before you start meditation. Then the mind disturbs. How do you? So the mind gets agitated when? What agitates the mind? Unfulfilled desires. So we have so many desires and many of them are unfulfilled. All of that is a rumbling in the mind. May not be conscious, but it's there. It keeps your mind agitated. Therefore, desire control. Then the last is the intellect disturbs. If the intellect has questions, why is this like that? Why is that like that? Then you can't concentrate. So all of this put together, that's why he says, Yatinam Yatachetasam is total liberation in Brahman for those who are free from desire and anger. Self-controlled means your entire personality is under the control of the intellect, with mind restrained again by the intellect, who have realized the self. And your entire being must be anchored in the self, because that's the only thing you want. You know, people talk about sports persons, like Virat Kohli, because of his recent performance. And he's 37, 38 years old. He's not spring chicken. How does he maintain that? So Sunil Gavaskar was talking about it, or I don't know, some other cricketer. And he said, he thinks cricket all the time. Why does he exercise? He has cricket in mind. What about his diet? I believe he eats the same food day in and day out. There is no boredom. For what? For cricket. And it's not that he doesn't like good food. And that is what gets you. Your mind has to be anchored in whatever you want to achieve. And it is then your body reaches there. First, the mind has to be there. It's the same thing with a lover and the beloved, right? A young man in love with a young girl is thinking of her 24 hours a day. You wake him up in the middle of the night, he'll say her name. That is absorption. But when you are absorbed in Atman, you're not disinterested in anything else. That is the main thing. Now, the next two verses are taken together, 27 and 28.
स्पर्शान् कृत्वा बहिर्बाह्यान् चक्षुश्चैवान्तरे भ्रुवोः प्राणापानौ समौ कृत्वा नासाभ्यन्तरचारिणौ यतेन्द्रियमनोबुद्धिः मुनिर्मोक्षपरायणः विगतेच्छाभयक्रोधः यः सदा मुक्त एव सः.
27. Having excluded external contacts, gazing between the eyebrows, balancing the incoming and outgoing breath, moving in the nostrils. 28. Controlling the senses, mind and intellect, solely pursuing moksha. Moksha, liberation. Free from desire, anger and fear, the sage is forever free. What a statement. So with this, we enter the last topic of this chapter, meditation introduced. This is the introduction of meditation. So the first thing that he's talking about is shutting out external contacts. How do you do that? Two ways. One, prior to meditation, the practices of karma, bhakti and jnana yogas. This must be ongoing, constant. Because this is what flushes out desires from your system. You cannot escape this. You have to do it all the time. The second is, even after you're well prepared and you're sitting in meditation, because of the very nature of the mind is asthira chanchala. Asthira, constantly going from place to place. And chanchala, even at one point, it's oscillating. And that is why it is equated to a monkey. If you go to a zoo, the monkey has the largest enclosure, the cage. Why? Because it's moving constantly. It doesn't sit in one place. And even at one place, it's restless. The mind is like that. Your mind is like that. So if you see, you're sitting here in this hour and 15 minutes, you're not focusing on what I'm saying. Your mind is going all over the place. It comes back when suddenly I say something which brings you back. Or I lower the volume or increase the volume, or you find others laughing. I don't know. Something brings you back. And then you're here for another 2 minutes and off you go. This is the mind. So in meditation, there are certain techniques to keep the mind there. One is the japamala. You know what the japamala is? Beads. So if you synchronize the beads, the movement of the beads with the mantra that you are chanting, the moment your mind slips and goes somewhere, you're not chanting the mantra, the finger stops, it's an alarm to you. So it's very scientifically designed. And then your mind comes back. Or you keep certain associations with the higher, like agarbatti, camphor, you light a lamp, and various things. So these are the two things you do. Then you're getting closer and closer to meditation. Your gaze, your eyes are shut, but your gaze should be between the eyebrows, means centered. You know why? when you're planning and scheming, you're strategizing something, your eyes are looking all over the place. A person who's not straightforward doesn't look you in the eye. Looking down, looking elsewhere, because it doesn't have the honesty to face you. Similarly, the internal gaze, when it is centered, you're most calm. Otherwise, your mind is flitting. But that doesn't mean you struggle. There are people who sit in meditation. They make all kinds of faces. That much effort you don't need to put. Stay calm, and the gaze should be between your eyebrows and slightly upward, because it indicates devotion. You always look up at your parents, you look up to God, you look up to your teacher, you look up to elders. That automatically puts you in a devotional mindset. And the hope is, or at least the belief is, that the Jnana Chakshu will open. Jnana Chakshu is the eye of wisdom. It is not a real eye, it is considered a symbol of enlightenment. Then equalize your prana and apana. Typically, your incoming breath should be slightly shorter than the outgoing breath. But when you normalize your breathing, you'll find that the mind is naturally calmer than it is before you practice prana. Senses, mind and intellect controlled through the practices of service, love and knowledge. See, at any time, there's a podcast that I listened to conducted by Americans, and there was a lady, they interviewed a psychologist, American psychologist, and she was saying that they had a particular university, I forgot which university, had done research on happiness. And they looked at all the happy people of the world, thousands of them. And they said there's one thing common between all of them. You know what that is? They are givers. Givers doesn't mean just give money. That is easier. That's the easiest thing to do. But they're givers. They are like, suppose you say, oh, I forgot my tissues. You say, really? You want tissues? The person will run. In a home, you find children are like that. When a guest comes, and especially when they feel affection for the guest, and they find the guest looking for something, auntie, you want tissue? Wait, I'll get it. And the child will run to the kitchen or wherever and get a box of tissues for the person. And then say, you want water? Wait, I'll get it for you. And the child will run. So this is that spirit of giving, the attitude of giving. But as the child grows, it is completely crushed. The child feels like saying, you want water, go help yourself. That's the difference. And that you should be, as they call it, nimble-footed. You know, in tennis, they say your whole foot should never be on the floor. While you play tennis, you should be on your toes all the time. Quick to move. Quick to give. Give anything. Give love. Give tissues. Give water. Give from the simplest things to the greatest of things. Number 2, replace your feelings of otherness, separateness, dislike, disdain. So many words that put this feeling across. Replace them with understanding, consideration, love. In your mind, the moment you think of a person, that's the key. What comes up in your mind? Crook. Or do you say, nice person? And it has nothing to do with what the person is. It has something to do with how you feel towards the person. And knowledge. You must constantly be a knowledge seeker. Knowledge of what? Not the world, not economics, not money management. That is what people focus on. But what? Knowledge of yourself. At least you must know what's sticking within you, what makes you angry, why are you constantly irritable, why are you lashing out at people. Focus there. And then, moksha parayana, your primary attention should be on how do I break free from this. That is called mumukshatva, where you have that desire to break free from a prison. This is the basic thing that all living beings share. You chain a dog. Is there anyone who has a pet dog? There. You tie the dog up, it will keep pulling at it. It will keep barking unless you train it. Because it wants to break free. That is what all of us have. But we don't know it. It's not conscious. Which is why you're struggling. You're running here, running there, trying to acquire things, trying to obtain things. Because of that restlessness is there because you want freedom. But because it's not conscious, therefore you're not acting on it in the right way. But when you're conscious and you know that moksha is the only thing that will save me. And any problem that you have, you trace it to this. Why am I miserable? First you say, oh, because my mother-in-law did this, or somebody else did that, or my boss is not good, or whatever. And then you go, okay, go one step further. One step further. Go to the bottom of it. And you'll realize it's only because you have not reached the self. It's like a coil spring. Have you seen a coil spring? Suppose it's 4 feet long in height and you compress it to 1 foot. What happens? There's pressure on your palm, pushing it upward. You release it a little bit to 2 feet. What happens? Pressure is there, but it's less. Release it to 3 feet. Still less pressure. Only when you release it to 4 feet, no pressure on the palm. Why? Because it has reached its original state. So similarly, we are all pressurized for pleasure. Why? Because infinite bliss is our original nature. And unless you get there, you're never going to be satisfied. Nothing will appease you. That is why the richest guy in the world is still struggling. Why? He wants more wealth. The most beautiful lady in the world wants more beauty. The most knowledgeable person, there is 1 Nobel Prizes and 2 Nobel Prizes, wants a 3rd. And you and I are never content. We will never be content until we get to our original state. So knowledge is important. I mean that moksha, that's constant yearning for moksha. Then you will be free from desire, fear, anger. Desire is the root. Fear and anger are modifications. See, you fulfill a desire and you reach the very top. Then what happens? Fear of losing. I don't know what this Trump is up to. The stock markets will fall. My assets will go. What will happen to me? Fear. Or if nothing else, my son-in-law will steal my money from me. And when the desire is not fulfilled, there's anger. If you do all of these things, then you become a Muni, sage, forever free. Whatever happens in the world, internally you're free. What a state. At least you must aspire for that. You must conceive of that state. Do you agree you're not free now? You're in a precarious condition, man. If your wife smiles, you're happy. If the wife frowns, you cannot be happy. Huh? But the poor lady may have 104 temperature. She can't bring herself to smile. Why are you unhappy? A million things you are dependent on. You're not free. Forever free. So, now we move to the last verse, verse 29.
भोक्तारं यज्ञतपसां सर्वलोकमहेश्वरं सुहृदं सर्वभूतानां ज्ञात्वा मां शान्तिमृच्छति.
One obtains peace, who knows me as the enjoyer of sacrifices and austerities, great Lord of all worlds, friend of all beings. Me means Atman, not Krishna. Who's speaking? Krishna speaking. But when he says me, he means Atman, not his personality. For the simple reason that as far as he is concerned, the personality doesn't exist. There is only Atman. So he says, one obtains peace, you will obtain peace when you know me, when you know Atman as the enjoyer of yajna and tapa. You see, why is he saying this? Because you can enjoy only when you sacrifice. Tapa means and do hard work. Sachin Tendulkar was interviewed once. And he was talking about how when he was a child, any free time he got, any holiday, he would just go down and play cricket the whole day. He wouldn't go up to his home for lunch, for milk, for nothing. So the mother had no choice but to send his lunch down. And then later, Shivaji Park was his temple. And the only food they got was vada pav. And he was saying his coach did not even allow them to drink water except at certain intervals. So, yajna, sacrifice, hard work, and tapas, anyone who has achieved success has done the two, isn't it? You see a businessman who's successful. He denies himself parties, he denies himself even food. There are so many days when the guy doesn't have time to have lunch. He goes home at 7:30 and that is his first meal of the day. Hard work. You have to meet government officials, you have to convince them of so many things, you have to meet with, income tax people, deal with income tax people. So many things. A sports person, an athlete. Like somebody asked her, and yet when you talk to them, they don't talk about the hard work they put in. Because to them, it's a pleasure. Similarly, And you see, that gives enjoyment. You ask an athlete, what are your best moments? He will say, when I'm practicing out in the sun, sweating it out. Lord of all worlds, Sarva Loka Maheshwara. When you function like this, you gain power. So, what is it that gives you power? Selflessness. When you drop your individuality and identify with the totality, that gives you power. What gave Mahatma Gandhi the power? He had nothing, he had no money, he had no political connections, he had no godfather sitting somewhere. What gave him the power? He went on a fast and all the people killing each other stopped fighting. Is that not true? Where did he get his power from? Just sacrifice and hard work. You should pick examples from the world. Don't pass judgment on them, please. After all, they're mortal. They may be having one or two faults. Don't focus there. Focus on the hard work. The other day was Swami Vivekananda's birthday. They were talking about his entire life was just torture if you look at it from one point of view. There were days when he went without food. He had so many illnesses in life because he just pushed himself so much that he died at a young age. But what a thing he achieved. And to the Parliament of Religion, when he started, all he said was, "Sisters and brothers of America." And he got a standing ovation. This is the power. Now, this power is the power of Atman. And then, what do you do with all this? The power and the thing. Friend of all beings. How beautifully he is put it. Surudam Sarva Bhutana. All beings. You can't say, I will be friends with everyone except my mother-in-law. You can't say, I'll be friends with everybody except my boss. Somehow you've got to get to the state where you're friends with all beings. You give solace, comfort, happiness. So you use your power only for that. Now we come to the end of this chapter. This is a fantastic chapter. I would appeal to all of you, if you don't have the text already, take it back home with you. Try and figure out what each verse is trying to tell us. And like I said, every day start with just one idea. One idea. It could be today, or today means tomorrow morning you wake up and say, I am going to be a giver. So, in every experience of yours, try and be a giver. Let's say you're waiting for the lift to go up to your office. And you notice an elderly man behind you. You say, after you. You're giving. Like this. Your colleague is pressurized, has too much work, and you reach out and say, can I do this? Can I do something for you? You're giving. One idea. The whole day you follow just that one idea. Not difficult, no? Stretch. To give, to serve, to love, and to think. And we meet next time and begin with chapter 6. We'll end with a prayer.
तत्सत् इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासूपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे कर्मसन्न्यासयोगो नाम पञ्चमोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच सन्न्यासं कर्मणां कृष्ण पुनर्योगं च शंससि यच्छ्रेययेतयोरेकम् तन्मे ब्रूहि सुनिश्चितम्।